The emergency beacon screamed across 17 star systems before anyone bothered to answer. Most species had learned to ignore distress calls from the Draknari homeworld. The dragon-like aliens had a reputation for creating their own problems through pride and stubbornness. Their massive forms, reaching heights of 12 feet with wingspan that could shadow small buildings, commanded respect through fear rather than friendship across the galaxy. Captain Sarah Chun stared at the transmission display aboard the human cargo vessel Wandering Star. The message repeated in broken galactic standard, desperation bleeding through even the universal translator's mechanical voice. This is Elder Vorthak of the Draknari High Council. Our young are dying. The flame sickness spreads through our nests. We have exhausted our medical knowledge. Any species with healing capabilities, we offer tribute in exchange for assistance. Please respond. Time grows short. Sarah's first officer, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, shook his head as he reviewed their cargo manifest. Captain, we're 3 days behind schedule already. These dragon folks never asked for help before. Why should we stick our necks out now? Because they're asking, Sarah replied simply. She'd served 15 years hauling freight between human colonies and alien trade posts. In all that time, she'd never heard a Draknari request help from anyone. Their warrior culture viewed asking for assistance as the deepest shame. The Wandering Star carried medical supplies bound for the Outer Rim colonies, but nothing sophisticated enough for an unknown plague. What they did have was something most species overlooked: human stubbornness and a willingness to try when others gave up. Set course for Drakros Prime, Sarah ordered. Best possible speed. Webb's eyebrows shot up. Captain, with respect, we're a cargo hauler, not a medical vessel. What can we possibly do that their own healers can't? Sarah pulled up the crew manifest on her tablet. Among their 30-person crew were 2 medics, a xenobiologist who'd joined them for passage to the Rim, and a surprising number of people who'd grown up on agricultural worlds. Farmers, she'd learned, developed an intuitive understanding of sickness that sometimes surpassed formal medical training. We'll figure out when we get there, she said. Send confirmation to the Draknari. Tell them humanity is coming. 3 days later, the Wandering Star dropped out of hyperspace near Drakros Prime. The planet hung before them like a glowing ember, its red-orange atmosphere swirling with the heat patterns that made it comfortable for the dragon-like inhabitants. Massive crystalline structures jutted from the surface. Draknari cities that resembled enormous geodes split open to reveal gleaming interiors. The response to their arrival came immediately. A gruff voice filled the bridge, speaking accented but clear galactic standard. Human vessel, this is Elder Vorthak. You came. We did not expect anyone to answer, especially not humans. Your species is known for avoiding our space. Sarah activated the comm. Elder Vorthak, this is Captain Sarah Chun of the Wandering Star. We're here to help however we can. Can you tell us more about this flame sickness? A pause followed, filled with background sounds, voices speaking in the rapid, hissing language of the Draknari, and something that might have been crying. When Vorthak spoke again, his voice carried a weight that transcended species barriers. It began in the nesting caverns 6 cycles ago. Our young, those in their first molting season, began losing their inner flame. In your terms, their body temperature drops dangerously low. They cannot digest food. They waste away despite our healers' efforts. We have lost 47 younglings already. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the xenobiologist traveling with them, had joined the bridge crew. She stepped forward, her face grave. Elder, can you describe the progression of symptoms in detail? Any patterns you've noticed? The flame flickers first, Vorthak explained. The younglings become lethargic, seek warmer places constantly. Then comes the shivering, terrible to see in a Draknari youth. Their scales lose luster. Food passes through them without nourishment. Death follows within days if the flame cannot be rekindled. Rodriguez exchanged glances with Sarah. That sounds metabolic rather than infectious. Has this affected any adults? None. Only the young in their first molting season. Those who have completed their first molt remain healthy. The docking procedure took longer than usual. Draknari ships weren't designed for human vessels, and the wandering star had to use magnetic clamps to secure against a crystalline docking spire that looked more like art than engineering. When the airlock finally cycled open, the heat hit them like a physical blow. Even with environmental suits, the temperature inside the Draknari station reached levels that made the humans sweat immediately. Elder Vorthak waited for them in the receiving chamber, a magnificent specimen of his species. His scales shimmered deep crimson and gold, and when he spread his wings in greeting, the membrane between the supporting bones glowed with internal heat patterns. "Captain Chun," he rumbled, inclining his massive head. "Dr. Rodriguez, we are grateful beyond words for your presence here." Sarah had met Draknari before, but never on their home territory. Vorthak stood nearly 14 feet tall, his presence commanding and ancient. Scars crisscrossed his hide, marks of battles fought and won over centuries of life. Yet when he looked at the human medical team, his golden eyes held something she'd never seen in a Draknari before, hope mixed with desperation. "Take us to the sick younglings," Rodriguez said without preamble. "Time is important." The nesting caverns lay deep within the crystalline city, reached through passages that curved and branched like organic growth. Draknari moved past them with urgent purpose, their claws clicking against crystal floors. The deeper they went, the warmer it became, until even the environmental suits struggled to keep the humans comfortable. "Here," Vorthak said, stopping before a massive circular chamber. "The nesting halls." Sarah gasped despite herself. The chamber stretched away in all directions, its walls lined with alcoves that glowed with soft, warm light. Each alcove held a nest of woven metal fibers that conducted heat, and in many of those nests lay small Draknari, younglings no larger than human children, their scales dull and lifeless. Adult Draknari moved between the nests, tending to the sick young with desperate care. Some carried warming stones, others offered food that went largely untouched. The sound that filled the chamber made Sarah's heart clench, the weak mewing of sick children, recognizable regardless of species. Rodriguez knelt beside the nearest nest, her scanner already active. The youngling inside looked up at her with enormous, dulled eyes. Its scales, which should have been bright with youth, appeared gray and lifeless. When Rodriguez held out her hand, the little creature pressed against her palm, seeking warmth. "Internal temperature 20 degrees below normal for the species," Rodriguez murmured, reading her scanner. "Metabolic rate severely depressed. Dr. Kim, I need blood samples if the elder approves." Dr. James Kim, one of their ship's medics, approached with sampling equipment. Vorthak nodded grimly. "Do what you must. We have tried everything our healers know." As the medical team worked, Sarah found herself talking to a Draknari caregiver who spoke broken galactic standard. The female, who introduced herself as Thessaria, had been tending the sick young for days without rest. "They waste away," Thessaria said, her voice breaking. "We feed them, warm them, sing the flame songs of our ancestors. Nothing helps. The flame grows dimmer each day." "Tell me about the flame songs," Sarah asked. Something about the phrasing caught her attention. Thessaria's golden eyes widened. "You do not know our ways. The flame songs call the inner fire, teach the young to kindle their metabolic heat. Without the flame, we cannot process food, cannot grow strong." Sarah felt a chill despite the overwhelming heat of the chamber. "These songs, are they just music or something more?" "More, yes. They contain the frequencies that resonate with our inner organs, stimulate the flame glands that produce our heat. Each family line has songs passed down through generations. And these younglings, they haven't learned the songs yet. They should be learning now in their first molt." But the sickness came before the teaching could begin. Rodriguez looked up from her scanner, overhearing the conversation. "Captain, I think we need to hear these flame songs." Vorthak, who had been watching the medical examinations with growing tension, turned toward them. The songs have not changed in 10,000 years. They cannot be the cause of this sickness. Maybe not the cause, Rodriguez said carefully, but possibly part of the solution. In human medicine, we've learned that some conditions respond to sound therapy, specific frequencies that affect cellular function. The elder's massive head tilted, considering. You believe the flame songs might heal where our medicine fails. I believe, Sarah interjected, that humans are good at looking at problems from directions nobody else thought to try. Over the next several hours, the human medical team worked with increasing urgency. Blood samples revealed what Rodriguez had suspected. The youngling's metabolic systems had essentially shut down, as if missing a crucial activation signal. Meanwhile, Thessaria and other caregivers performed the traditional flame songs for the human team's recording equipment. The songs proved unlike anything Sarah had expected. Rather than the roaring battle chants she associated with Draknari culture, these were complex, layered melodies that seemed to vibrate through the chamber walls. When performed properly, the crystalline formations around them resonated, creating harmonic frequencies that made the air itself pulse with warmth. It's biomechanical, Rodriguez explained to Vorthak as data flowed across her tablet. The songs don't just teach the younglings, they physically stimulate specific organs that regulate their metabolic fire. But something's interrupting the process. What could interrupt sounds that have worked for millennia? Vorthak demanded. Dr. Kim looked up from a blood analysis. Elder, have there been any changes to the nesting chambers recently? New construction, different materials, anything that might affect acoustics? Vorthak's golden eyes narrowed as he considered. 2 cycles ago, we reinforced the outer chambers with new crystal formations. The asteroids have been increasing, threatening the structural integrity. Show us these new formations, Rodriguez requested immediately. The tour led them through passages that grew progressively newer, the crystal work more refined and geometrically precise. Where the older chambers featured organic, flowing curves, these newer sections displayed mathematical perfection, beautiful but sterile. When Thessaria began one of the flame songs in the new chambers, the difference was immediately apparent. Instead of the rich, resonant harmonics they'd heard in the nesting halls, the song fell flat, its frequencies absorbed and scattered by the precisely cut crystal walls. The new crystal is too pure, Rodriguez said, understanding flooding her voice. It's absorbing the specific frequencies the younglings need instead of amplifying them. The flame songs aren't reaching their organs at the proper intensity. Vorthak's wings spread in a display of shock and growing rage. We sought to protect our young by strengthening the chambers. Instead, we have poisoned them with our own improvements. Sarah stepped forward, her mind racing through possibilities. Elder, what if we could modify the chambers temporarily? Create sound amplification that restores the proper frequencies. You would do this? Help us repair what our pride has broken. That's why we came. The next day brought feverish activity as humans and Draknari worked together in ways neither species had imagined. Sarah's engineering team, led by Chief Engineer Paul Santos, analyzed the acoustic properties of both old and new crystal formations. They identified the specific frequency ranges being absorbed and designed portable amplification units that could restore the proper harmonics. Meanwhile, Rodriguez and Kim worked with Draknari healers to identify which younglings were strongest enough to attempt the first trials. The human medical equipment provided diagnostic capabilities the Draknari had never possessed, allowing them to monitor the younglings' responses to treatment in real time. Thessaria proved invaluable as a bridge between the species. Her broken galactic standard improved rapidly as she worked with the human team, and she began teaching some of the simpler flame songs to the humans themselves. Sarah found herself humming one of the melodies as she worked, surprised by how naturally the complex harmonies seemed to flow. You have good instincts for the flame songs, Thessaria told her during a brief rest period. Your voice carries proper warmth. I grew up on a farming world, Sarah replied. We sang to the livestock sometimes. Said it helped them grow stronger. Perhaps all songs of caring carry similar power. The first test came at what the Draknari called Flame Hour, when a nesting chambers traditionally filled with the sounds of teaching songs. Santos had positioned his amplification units throughout the chamber, carefully calibrated to restore the frequencies that the new crystal absorbed. Elder Vorthak stood with the human team as Thessaria and 3 other caregivers began the opening flame song. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Where before the song had fallen flat against the crystal walls, now it swelled and resonated, the chamber itself becoming a vast musical instrument. Harmonics built upon harmonics, creating a sound that seemed to penetrate not just the air, but the very bones of those listening. The younglings responded within minutes. Those with enough strength lifted their heads, their dull eyes brightening. The little one Rodriguez had first examined actually attempted to join the song with weak chirping sounds. Internal temperature rising, Kim reported, scanning the nearest youngling. Metabolic indicators improving across the board. But the real proof came an hour later when Thessaria offered food to her charges. For the first time in weeks, the younglings began to eat, their digestive systems finally functioning properly as their inner flames rekindled. Elder Vorthak watched in silence as his people's young began to recover, his massive form trembling with emotion that transcended species boundaries. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of profound gratitude. Captain Chun, your species has given us back our future. We will not forget this debt. Sarah looked around the chamber, watching human and Draknari work side by side, and felt something shift in her understanding of the galaxy. Elder, I don't think it's about debt. Sometimes helping others is just what you do. As the wandering star prepared to depart Drakros Prime 3 days later, the nesting chambers rang with healthy flame songs. The younglings who had been dying were now eating regularly, their scales beginning to show the first glimmers of their adult colors. The older young, those who had already learned their flame songs before the crisis, had begun teaching the newly recovered ones, creating a backup system of knowledge that wouldn't depend solely on the adults. Vorthak accompanied the human delegation to their ship, his arms filled with gifts, crystalline artworks, rare minerals, and data cores containing Draknari technological innovations that had never been shared with other species. Elder, this is too much, Sarah protested. We were glad to help. You misunderstand, Vorthak replied. These gifts are not payment. They're symbols of alliance. The Draknari Council has voted unanimously. Humanity will be remembered as the species who answered when no one else would. Your people will always find welcome in our space. Rodriguez stepped forward with her own gift, a complete medical database of human diagnostic techniques, treatment protocols, and acoustic therapy methods. This is our contribution to your healers. If something like this happens again, you'll have the tools to identify and treat it yourselves. More valuable than all our crystals, Vorthak said solemnly, accepting the data core. Knowledge shared freely is the greatest treasure. As the wandering star pulled away from Drakros Prime, Sarah stood on the bridge watching the red-orange planet shrink in the view screen. They were now 4 days behind schedule, their cargo holds partly empty after sharing medical supplies with the Draknari, and their engineering crew exhausted from round-the-clock work to design the acoustic amplifiers. Captain, Webb said quietly, the shipping company's not going to be happy about the delays and lost cargo. Sarah smiled, thinking of the sounds of healthy younglings echoing through crystal chambers. Marcus, some things are more important than shipping schedules. Besides, I have a feeling this won't be the last time we hear from our new Draknari friends. She was right. Even as the wandering star jumped to hyperspace, messages were already spreading through Draknari space, carried by their fastest ships to every corner of their territory. The story of the humans who had answered their call, who had looked at their problem with fresh eyes, and found solutions where none had existed before. But more than the story of one rescue, it was the beginning of something larger. In a galaxy where most species kept to themselves, where asking for help was seen as weakness and offering it was viewed with suspicion, humanity had shown a different way. The dragon had summoned flame through centuries of tradition and pride. But when that tradition failed and pride became a barrier to survival, it was a forgotten child of space, the human species, overlooked by greater civilizations who had answered with compassion, creativity, and the simple belief that helping others was always worth the cost. As the stars streaked past the viewports, Sarah began planning their next route. The Rim colonies would understand the delay once they heard the full story. And if any other distress calls came along the way, well, the wandering star would be ready to answer those too. After all, that's what humans did. 6 months after the rescue at Dracros Prime, Captain Sarah Chun received an encrypted message that made her crew stop their routine cargo operations. The transmission came through channels reserved for the highest levels of galactic governance, the kind of communication that could reshape interstellar politics. Captain Chun, the holographic figure, announced itself as Ambassador Krell of the Galactic Trade Consortium. Your actions regarding the Draknari situation have created significant ripples throughout known space. We require your immediate presence at Nexus Station for discussions of utmost importance. Sarah stared at the message as it repeated automatically. Nexus Station served as the de facto capital of galactic civilization, a massive structure built at the intersection of major trade routes. Species from across the galaxy maintained embassies there, conducting the delicate negotiations that kept interstellar commerce flowing. Captain, Lieutenant Webb said nervously, the consortium doesn't usually invite cargo haulers to Nexus Station. What do you think this is about? Dr. Rodriguez, who had decided to stay aboard the Wandering Star rather than transfer to a research vessel, looked up from her tablet where she'd been analyzing similar rescue scenarios across galactic history. I think word has gotten out about what we accomplished with the Draknari, and I suspect some people aren't happy about it. Sarah's intuition told her Rodriguez was right. In the months since leaving Dracros Prime, they'd received numerous reports through unofficial channels. The Draknari had indeed shared their story throughout their space, but the tale had spread far beyond dragon territory. Other species were beginning to question why they'd ignored the distress calls, why they'd been so quick to dismiss Draknari pride that they'd missed a genuine crisis. Set course for Nexus Station, Sarah ordered. Whatever this is about, we'll face it head-on. The journey to Nexus Station took 8 days through hyperspace lanes crowded with traffic from dozens of species. As they approached the massive structure, Sarah felt the familiar mix of awe and intimidation that came with viewing one of the galaxy's greatest achievements. Nexus Station stretched across 300 kilometers of space, its modular sections growing and adapting constantly as new species joined the galactic community. Docking protocols guided them to a civilian berth far from the diplomatic sections, but their arrival didn't go unnoticed. Other ships in the vicinity transmitted brief acknowledgement signals, some welcoming, others noticeably cold. Word of their presence spread quickly through the station's communication networks. The meeting location surprised Sarah. Instead of a formal conference room, Ambassador Krell had requested they gather in one of the station's cultural exchange areas, a massive observation deck where beings from different worlds could interact in carefully controlled atmospheric conditions. Ambassador Krell himself proved to be a Zentorian, a species known for their diplomatic skills and their ability to read the emotional states of other beings through specialized sensory organs. His blue-tinted skin and large, dark eyes gave him an appearance that many species found calming, which had served him well in his role mediating interspecies disputes. Captain Chun, he greeted her with the formal bow preferred by his species. Dr. Rodriguez, Lieutenant Webb, thank you for responding so quickly to our invitation. Ambassador, Sarah replied carefully. Your message suggested this involved the Draknari situation. How can we help? Krell gestured to a nearby seating area designed to accommodate multiple species' comfort requirements. As they settled themselves, he activated a privacy field that would prevent their conversation from being overheard or recorded. The Galactic Trade Consortium has received formal complaints regarding your actions at Dracros Prime. Krell began without preamble. 7 major species have filed protests, claiming that your intervention violated established protocols regarding interspecies medical assistance. Sarah felt her temper rising, but kept her voice level. What protocols? We responded to a distress call that no one else answered. That is precisely the issue, Krell replied. The established practice when dealing with Draknari requests has been to ignore them unless they offer significant compensation up front. Your species' decision to respond freely has created diplomatic complications. Rodriguez leaned forward, her expression sharp. You're saying we're in trouble for saving dying children? Not in trouble, exactly, Krell clarified. But your actions have forced other species to confront their own choices regarding the Draknari distress call. Several governments are facing internal pressure to explain why they didn't respond. This has created political instability in multiple systems. Webb spoke up for the first time. With respect, Ambassador, that sounds like their problem, not ours. Krell's sensory organs flickered, a sign of stress in a species. Unfortunately, Lieutenant, when political instability affects trade relationships, it becomes the consortium's problem, and, by extension, your problem. Sarah studied the ambassador's body language, noting the tension he was trying to hide. There's more to this, isn't there? What aren't you telling us? A pause stretched between them before Krell activated additional privacy protocols. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of information shared reluctantly. The Draknari have declared formal alliance with humanity. They've withdrawn from 3 major trade agreements and redirected their mineral exports to human space exclusively. Other species are demanding compensation for lost revenue, claiming your intervention constituted unfair trade manipulation. The implications hit Sarah like a cold wave. The Draknari controlled some of the galaxy's richest mineral deposits, particularly the rare crystals used in faster-than-light communications. If they cut off other species to favor humanity, the economic ramifications would be staggering. We never asked for any of this, Sarah said. We just answered a distress call. I believe you, Krell replied. But intention matters less than results in galactic politics. The question now is what we do about it. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the observation deck's main entrance. A group of beings in formal diplomatic attire were approaching, their body language aggressive despite the peaceful setting. Sarah recognized representatives from several species she'd encountered during her cargo runs. The militaristic Korth, the trade-focused Vellani, and others whose names she couldn't recall. Captain Shun, the lead Korth delegate, called out in heavily accented galactic standard. We demand explanation for your species' illegal interference in established trade relationships. Sarah stood, feeling her crew flanking her protectively. The Korth delegate towered over her, his 4 arms crossing in a display of intimidation that had worked on many other species. But Sarah had dealt with angry customers before, and she wasn't easily impressed. Delegate, she replied calmly. My crew responded to a medical emergency. If that interferes with your trade relationships, perhaps you should examine your own priorities. You had no authority to provide medical assistance to the Draknari. A Vellani representative interjected, her translated voice sharp with accusation. Such actions require consortium approval when they involve economically significant species. Rodriguez stepped forward, her medical credentials giving her authority in discussions of life and death situations. Are you seriously suggesting we should have let children die because helping them might affect trade agreements? The Draknari situation was not our concern, the Korth delegate responded. They chose isolation through their pride. The consequences of that choice were theirs to bear. Including the death of their young? Sarah asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The question hung in the air, and Sarah noticed that several other species representatives who had been watching from a distance were now paying closer attention to the conversation. Ambassador Krell's sensory organs were flickering rapidly as he read the emotional states of everyone present. Captain, Krell interrupted before the confrontation could escalate further. Perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting. But the Korth delegate wasn't finished. Your species lacks the maturity for galactic citizenship. This incident proves humans cannot be trusted to respect established order. Sarah felt something snap inside her. 6 months of polite diplomatic language and careful political considerations suddenly seemed like meaningless noise compared to the memory of dying younglings in crystal chambers. "You know what?" she said, stepping closer to the Korth delegate. "You're right. Humans can't be trusted to respect an established order that values trade profits over the lives of children. We can't be trusted to ignore distress calls just because the species asking for help has a proud reputation. And we definitely can't be trusted to let politics determine who deserves medical assistance." The observation deck had gone silent. Representatives from dozens of species were now openly watching the confrontation, some recording it for transmission back to their homeworlds. "If that makes us unfit for galactic citizenship," Sarah continued, "then I guess that's your decision to make. But before you decide, I want you to think about something. What happens the next time your species faces a crisis that your own technology can't solve? What happens when you need help from someone who thinks differently, who approaches problems from angles you never considered?" She gestured around the observation deck, taking in the diverse array of species represented. "You're all so focused on established order and trade relationships that you've forgotten why this consortium exists in the first place. It's supposed to make all of us stronger by working together. Instead, you've created a system where helping others is seen as suspicious, where answering distress calls requires permission from committee." Ambassador Krell was transmitting rapid signals to security personnel, clearly concerned that the situation might escalate to violence. But the Korth delegate simply stared at Sarah, his 4 eyes unblinking. "And what would you have us do instead, human? Abandon all structure and respond to every cry for help regardless of consequences? I'd have you remember that every species on this station was once unknown and vulnerable," Sarah replied. "Someone had to take a chance on each of us, had to decide we were worth helping despite the risks. The Dragnari may be proud, but their children were dying. When children are dying, the only acceptable response is to help if you can." A new voice joined the conversation, speaking from the edge of the crowd that had gathered. "The human speaks truth that shames us all." Everyone turned to see Elder Vorthak approaching, his massive form moving with surprising grace through the mixed atmosphere of the observation deck. His presence caused a stir among the diplomatic representatives, many of whom had never seen a Dragnari on Nexus Station. "Elder Vorthak," Ambassador Krell said, clearly surprised. "We weren't expecting Dragnari representation at this meeting." "No," Vorthak rumbled, his golden eyes scanning the assembled diplomats. "You expected to discuss my people's fate without including our voice. How typically civilized of you." The Korth delegate stepped back, instinctively recognizing a predator despite the diplomatic setting. "Elder, your people's alliance with humanity has disrupted established trade relationships. Compensation must be discussed." Vorthak's wings spread slightly, a display that filled a significant portion of the observation deck. "Compensation? You speak of compensation for trade agreements built on our desperation? For centuries, we traded with you under terms that favored your economies because we believed isolation was weakness." He turned to address the broader crowd of diplomatic representatives. "When our children were dying, we sent distress calls to every species in this consortium. Every species with medical capabilities that might have helped. Do you know how many of you responded?" The silence that followed was deafening. "None," Vorthak continued. "Not one species offered assistance. Some didn't even acknowledge our transmissions. Only the humans answered. Only the humans saw past our pride to the desperate parents watching their children waste away. The Dragnari are known for their self-sufficiency," the Villani representative said defensively. "We assumed you would solve the problem yourselves. You assumed we were too proud to accept help," Vorthak corrected. "And you were right. We were. But Captain Chun and her crew looked past our pride to see our need. They risked their own resources and safety to save children they had never met." Sarah felt uncomfortable being the center of attention, but recognized that Vorthak was making a point larger than just their specific situation. Now you complain about lost trade revenue. Vorthak continued, as if our gratitude and friendship were commodities you deserve to profit from regardless of your own actions. You want compensation for relationships you never valued enough to maintain when we needed help. Ambassador Krell stepped forward, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Elder, the consortium understands your gratitude to humanity. But suddenly, shifting all Draknari trade to human space creates economic instability that affects everyone. Then, perhaps, a new voice interjected. The consortium should consider why stability depends so heavily on the compliance of species who have been given no reason for loyalty. The speaker was someone Sarah didn't recognize, a tall, slender being with silvery skin and large eyes that suggested high intelligence. Their species identifier marked them as Etherian, a race known for their philosophical contributions to galactic civilization. Counselor Zan, Krell acknowledged with obvious respect. We didn't expect Etherian involvement in this matter. The Etherian Council has been observing this situation with great interest, Counselor Zan replied. What the humans accomplished with the Draknari represents something we haven't seen in galactic politics for centuries. Genuine altruism leading to unexpected solutions. They moved through the crowd with fluid grace, their attention focused on Sarah and her crew. Captain Shun, your species' approach to the Draknari crisis has prompted extensive discussion among our philosophers. We're curious about the decision-making process that led to your intervention. Sarah felt way out of her depth discussing philosophy with one of the galaxy's most advanced species, but she answered honestly. There wasn't much of a process, Counselor. We heard that children were dying, and we had medical supplies. It seemed obvious. Obvious, Zen repeated thoughtfully. Yet no other species found it obvious. What made the difference? I don't know, Sarah admitted. Maybe we're just not smart enough to overthink it. The comment drew a sound that might have been laughter from several species present. Counselor Zan's large eyes seemed to sparkle with amusement. An interesting hypothesis, Captain. Intelligence used to justify an action rather than enable it. They turned to address the broader gathering. The Etherian Council proposes a different interpretation of recent events. The observation deck fell silent again. When Etherians offered philosophical interpretations, the galaxy listened. For too long, Zan continued, our consortium has operated on the principle that stability requires predictability. We've created systems that discourage innovation, that punish deviation from established patterns. The result has been a galaxy where trade flows smoothly, but genuine cooperation has withered. They gestured towards Sarah and Vorthak. These two species have demonstrated something we thought impossible, that genuine partnership can emerge from crisis, that helping others can create value that transcends traditional economic models. Philosophical considerations aside, the Korth delegate interrupted. The practical matter remains. Draknari trade redirections are costing our economies significant revenue. Then, adapt, counselors and replied simply. Find ways to earn Draknari partnership rather than demanding it as an entitlement. The universe has changed, delegate. The question is whether the consortium will change with it. Ambassador Krell looked increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation moved beyond his ability to control. Counselor, while we appreciate Etherian wisdom, we still need practical solutions to immediate problems. I agree, Sarah said suddenly, an idea forming in her mind. And I think I have one. All attention turned back to her, and Sarah took a deep breath before speaking. The plan that was forming felt audacious, but then again, audacious had worked pretty well so far. What if instead of fighting over existing trade relationships, we created new ones? The Draknari have medical needs that their own technology can't meet, but they also have diagnostic and treatment techniques that other species could benefit from. Humans have shown we can bridge the gap between their medical knowledge and other species' capabilities. She looked around at the diplomatic representatives. Rather than trying to force the old system to work, why don't we build something new? a medical cooperation network that shares knowledge and resources across species lines. The Draknari get access to diverse medical approaches when they need them. Other species get access to Draknari expertise and materials, and everyone benefits. Dr. Rodriguez picked up the thread immediately. The acoustic therapy techniques we helped develop could be adapted for other species with similar physiological systems. And the diagnostic equipment we use to understand the Draknari condition could be enhanced with their crystalline technology. Elder Vorthak's golden eyes gleamed with interest. The Draknari Council would support such cooperation. Our healers have long wished to study the medical approaches of other species. The economic benefits would be substantial. Counselors added approvingly. Knowledge shared multiplies in value rather than diminishing through distribution. Ambassador Krell looked around at the gathering, clearly sensing that the conversation had moved beyond his initial agenda. Such a proposal would require extensive negotiation and approval from multiple governments. Then, let's start negotiating, Sarah said. Right here, right now. We've got representatives from major species, medical expertise, and the will to make it work. The Villani representative stepped forward, her commercial instincts clearly engaged. What assurances would we have that human medical techniques will be shared fairly? Your species could use this network to gain unfair advantages. The same assurances any of us would have, Sarah replied. We make agreements, we honor them, and we build trust over time. The same way any successful partnership works. And if disputes arise, the Korth delegate asked. We figure out solutions together, Sarah said. The way we're doing right now. Over the next several hours, the impromptu gathering on the observation deck evolved into something unprecedented in galactic politics. A real-time negotiation involving multiple species with no formal agenda and no predetermined outcomes. Representatives called their governments for guidance. Technical experts joined the discussion via holographic link, and slowly, the framework for a new kind of interspecies cooperation began to emerge. The medical cooperation network that Sarah had proposed grew and evolved as more voices joined the conversation. The Etherians offered philosophical and ethical frameworks. The Villani provided commercial structure. The Korth contributed their expertise in large-scale logistics. Even species that had initially been hostile to the idea began to see opportunities for their own civilizations. Elder Vorthak proved to be a skilled negotiator despite his people's reputation for directness. He offered access to Draknari crystal technology and mineral resources while ensuring that his species maintained sovereignty over their most sensitive knowledge. As the discussions continued into the night cycle, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, she'd been commanding a simple cargo hauler, focused on delivery schedules and profit margins. Now she was apparently helping to reshape galactic civilization. Captain, Dr. Rodriguez said during a brief break in the negotiations, "Do you realize what we're creating here?" Sarah looked around the observation deck, where beings from dozens of species were working together with an energy and enthusiasm she'd never seen in formal diplomatic settings. "Something that should have existed a long time ago," she replied. "The formal agreements would take months to negotiate and years to implement fully. But as the representatives began to disperse back to their respective embassies, Sarah knew that something fundamental had shifted. The galaxy had remembered that cooperation was possible, that helping others created value for everyone involved. Ambassador Krell approached as the crowd thinned, his expression thoughtful. "Captain Shun, I want you to know that today's discussion will be remembered as a turning point in galactic relations." "Just as long as it helps," Sarah replied. "That's all we ever wanted." As the wandering star prepared to depart Nexus Station, Sarah's communication array lit up with incoming messages. Some were congratulations from species governments. Others were requests for assistance with various medical emergencies. A few were job offers from organizations wanting to hire the crew that had somehow become famous for solving impossible problems. But the message that mattered most came from Elder Vorthak, transmitted directly to her personal channel. "Captain Shun, The Dragnari Council has voted to establish a permanent embassy on Nexus Station. Our first ambassador will be Thessaria, who learned so much from working with your team. She wanted you to know that the flame songs she taught your people have been added to our most sacred archives, honored as the bridge between our species and yours. Sarah smiled, remembering the Dragnari caregiver who had worked tirelessly to save the sick younglings. Thessaria would make an excellent ambassador. Lieutenant Webb, she called as they cleared the station's traffic patterns, set course for the Outer Rim. We got cargo to deliver. Captain, Webb replied with a grin. Back to the simple life. Sarah laughed, knowing there was nothing simple about their lives anymore. The galaxy had changed, and they'd helped change it. But, at heart, they were still the crew of a cargo hauler, still committed to helping people wherever they found them. As they jumped to hyperspace, carrying medical supplies to colonies that needed them, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction. The dragon had summoned flame, the forgotten child had answered, and together they'd reminded the galaxy that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was simply the willingness to help. 2 years after the Medical Cooperation Network began operations, Captain Sarah Chun found herself standing in the most unlikely place imaginable. A crystal garden on Drakros Prime, watching human and Dragnari children play together while their parents discuss trade agreements and research partnerships. The transformation had been remarkable. What started as a simple rescue mission had evolved into the largest interspecies cooperation project in galactic history. The Medical Alliance Network, as it had come to be known, now included 47 species sharing knowledge, resources, and expertise across political boundaries that had seemed immutable just a few years earlier. Captain Chun, a young voice called out in perfect galactic standard. Sarah turned to see Vorthak's grandson, Kellyan, approaching with the confident stride of a youngling who had grown up believing the galaxy was full of friends rather than strangers. Kellyan, Sarah smiled, switching to the simplified Dragnari she'd been learning. How are your flame songs coming along? Very well, the young Dragnari replied, his scales bright with health and excitement. Thessaria says I have natural talent. But I've been learning human songs too. Dr. Rodriguez taught me one about stars. Sarah's heart warmed as she watched the youngling demonstrate a simple melody that Rodriguez had adapted from an old Earth lullaby. The notes carried the same harmonic frequencies that supported Dragnari metabolism, but with a distinctly human emotional structure that spoke of wonder and exploration rather than the traditional Dragnari themes of strength and honor. The children adapt so quickly, Elder Vorthak observed, approaching with a measured dignity that still marked his every movement. Despite the changes in his world, the old dragon maintained his formal bearing, though Sarah had learned to read the warmth in his golden eyes. Both species do, Sarah replied, watching human and Dragnari younglings collaborate on building a structure from crystal fragments and metal salvage. The children had invented their own hybrid construction techniques that neither species had developed independently. The Alliance Council is pleased with the progress reports, Vorthak continued. Medical response times across member species have improved by 60%, and collaborative research has produced 17 breakthrough treatments in the past year alone. Sarah nodded, but her attention was divided. Something had been nagging at her for weeks. A pattern in the emergency calls coming through Alliance channels that suggested a larger problem developing. Elder, she said carefully, have you noticed anything unusual about the recent distress calls? The pattern of emergencies seems different from what we dealt with in the early days. Vorthak's massive head tilted thoughtfully. You refer to the increase in calls from non-Alliance species. Exactly, and the nature of the problems they're reporting. These aren't random medical emergencies or technical failures. There's something systematic about them. Over the past 6 months, the Alliance had received increasingly urgent requests for assistance from species that had initially rejected membership in a medical network. The problems they reported were complex and varied. Crop failures on agricultural worlds, mysterious equipment malfunctions on industrial planets, communication breakdowns affecting entire star systems. Dr. Rodriguez has been analyzing the data, Sarah continued. She thinks we're looking at coordinated interference rather than coincidental failures. Interference by whom? Vorthak asked, his voice carrying the edge that suggested his warrior instincts were engaging. That's what we're trying to figure out. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Rodriguez herself, approaching with a quick, purposeful stride that meant she had important news. Over the past 2 years, she had evolved from a simple xenobiologist into one of the galaxy's leading experts on interspecies cooperation, her research forming the theoretical foundation for much of the Alliance's work. Captain Elder, she greeted them breathlessly. I've been analyzing the latest distress calls, and I think I know what we're dealing with. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Rodriguez's tone suggested the news wasn't good. It's sabotage, Rodriguez continued. Systematic, coordinated sabotage targeting species that are considering Alliance membership. Evidence? Vorthak asked immediately, his military background showing. Rodriguez activated a portable holographic display, showing a star map with incident locations marked in red. The pattern is too precise to be coincidental. Every affected system had recently sent diplomatic inquiries about joining the Medical Alliance. The failures are sophisticated enough to require inside knowledge of each species' technology, but subtle enough to appear accidental. Sarah studied the pattern, seeing the implications immediately. Someone's trying to make Alliance membership look dangerous. Create the impression that joining us brings problems rather than solutions. Who would have the capability to pull this off? Vorthak rumbled, his wings spreading slightly in an unconscious display of aggression. That's the concerning part, Rodriguez replied. This level of coordination would require significant resources and detailed intelligence about multiple species. It suggests involvement by someone with access to consortium-level information. The implications hung heavy between them. The Galactic Trade Consortium had officially endorsed the Medical Alliance, but Sarah had always suspected that some powerful interests within the consortium viewed their success with hostility. We need more information, Sarah decided, and we need to help the affected species before whoever's doing this causes irreversible damage. The Alliance Council should be informed immediately, Vorthak suggested. This threatens the stability of everything we've built. Agreed. But first, I want to respond to one of these distress calls personally. If someone's trying to sabotage Alliance operations, I want to see their work firsthand. The emergency call that Sarah chose to answer came from the Kepler system, where the Meridian species was experiencing catastrophic failures in their atmosphere processors. The Meridians were an aquatic species that had recently expressed interest in Alliance membership, seeing potential benefits in sharing their advanced biotechnology with other species. The wandering star arrived in Kepler space to find a system in crisis. The Meridian homeworld's atmosphere was becoming increasingly toxic as their biological air processing systems failed one by one. Emergency evacuations were underway, but the species lacked sufficient transport to relocate their entire population. This is Coordinator Synth of the Meridian Emergency Response Council, came the transmission as they approached the planet. Human vessel, we're grateful for your response, but fear you may have arrived too late. Our atmosphere processors are failing faster than we can repair them. Coordinator Synth, this is Captain Shun of the Medical Alliance. We're here to help. Can you describe the nature of the failures? The bioprocessors that convert waste gases to breathable atmosphere have begun producing toxic compounds instead. Our scientists cannot determine the cause. The failure pattern suggests infection by unknown microorganisms, but we have found no evidence of biological contamination. Dr. Rodriguez, who had insisted on joining this mission personally, was already reviewing sensor data from the planet's surface. Captain, I'm detecting traces of synthetic compounds in the failing processors. This isn't biological, it's chemical sabotage. Sarah felt anger building in her chest. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to undermine the Alliance. They were willing to poison an entire world to make their point. Coordinator Synth, we believe we can identify and neutralize the contamination. Request permission to deploy our technical teams to your processing facilities. The response came with obvious relief. Permission granted immediately. We will provide all assistance possible. The next 18 hours tested every skill the Wandering Star's crew had developed over their years of emergency response. Working with Meridian scientists, they traced the contamination to sophisticated chemical agents that had been introduced into the bioprocessors through their maintenance systems. Chief Engineer Santos discovered the insertion method, micro-drones that had infiltrated the facilities during routine supply deliveries. The drones were advanced enough to avoid Meridian security systems, but they bore molecular signatures that suggested origin from consortium-controlled manufacturing facilities. This is military-grade sabotage equipment, Santos reported as they worked to neutralize the chemical agents. Not something you can buy on the open market. Meanwhile, Dr. Rodriguez collaborated with Meridian biotechnicians to develop neutralizing compounds that could cleanse the contaminated processors without damaging the beneficial microorganisms that kept the system functioning. The good news, she reported after 12 hours of intensive work, is that we can fix this. The bad news is that it's going to take weeks to fully restore the atmospheric balance. And the Meridians can't breathe their own air until we do. Sarah made the decision that would later be hailed as another example of Alliance innovation. Then, we bring them somewhere they can breathe while we fix their world. The solution required coordination between multiple Alliance species. Draknari crystal technology provided the basis for temporary atmosphere processors that could be rapidly deployed. Human engineering expertise adapted the systems for Meridian physiology. Valani commercial networks provided transportation. Within days, temporary colonies were established on 3 nearby worlds where Meridian refugees could survive while their homeworld was restored. But, more importantly, the rescue operation provided the evidence the Alliance needed to identify the source of the sabotage. The microdrones came from Hexarch Industries, Rodriguez reported as they compiled their findings. It's a consortium contractor that specializes in security solutions for member governments. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. And who would have the authority to authorize covert operations using consortium contractors? The Trade Security Council. Vorthak answered grimly. He had joined them aboard the Wandering Star to personally oversee the Alliance response. A subset of consortium leadership that officially doesn't exist, but has significant influence over policy decisions. The Trade Security Council represented the old guard of galactic politics, species, and organizations that had profited from the traditional system of isolated, competing civilizations. The Alliance's success in creating genuine cooperation threatened their business model. They're trying to destroy what we've built, Sarah said, stating the obvious conclusion. Then, we must ensure they fail, Vorthak replied with draconic determination. The Alliance has proven that cooperation creates prosperity for all. We will not allow fear and greed to drag the galaxy back into isolation. The confrontation came at the next Consortium General Assembly, where Alliance representatives had been invited to present their annual progress report. Sarah found herself once again standing before diplomatic representatives from across the galaxy. But this time, she wasn't alone. Elder Vorthak stood beside her, along with Ambassador Thessaria and representatives from 47 Alliance member species. Honored delegates, Sarah began, her voice carrying across the vast assembly hall. The Medical Alliance has exceeded all initial projections for interspecies cooperation. Member species have shared knowledge and resources that have improved health outcomes across the galaxy. She activated a holographic display showing statistical improvements in medical response times, breakthrough treatments, and successful emergency interventions. The numbers were impressive by any measure. However, she continued, we have discovered systematic attempt to sabotage these successes through coordinated attacks on species considering Alliance membership. The reaction was immediate. Representatives from several species began demanding details, while others called for investigations. But Sarah noticed that certain delegates remained conspicuously silent. The ones she suspected were connected to the Trade Security Council. Ambassador Thessaria stepped forward, her translation device rendering her Draknari speech into perfect galactic standard. The Alliance possesses evidence of deliberate contamination of Meridian atmospheric systems using consortium contractor resources. This sabotage endangered an entire planetary population. That is a serious accusation, responded Delegate Horth, a Zentaurian who Sarah knew served on the Trade Security Council. The consortium categorically denies any involvement in sabotage operations. Then, you'll support a full investigation, Sarah replied immediately, including access to HFY Industries' operational records and deployment logs for their micro-drone systems. The silence that followed was telling. Delegate Horth's sensory organs flickered rapidly, the Zentaurian equivalent of nervous sweating. Such an investigation would compromise legitimate security operations, another council member protested. Trade route protection requires confidential capabilities that cannot be disclosed. Elder Vorthak's massive form shifted forward, his presence commanding attention from every delegate in the assembly. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a species that had commanded respect for millennia. Delegates, the Draknari have watched civilizations rise and fall for 10,000 years. We have seen empires built on conquest, others founded on trade, and a few that attempted genuine cooperation. Only one model has ever created lasting prosperity for all participants. His golden eyes swept the assembly. The Alliance represents that model, species working together because they choose to, not because they are forced to by economic necessity or military threat. Those who seek to destroy this cooperation do so because they profit from division and conflict. The Alliance threatens no one, counselors and added from the Etherian section. It offers only the opportunity for species to work together voluntarily. The fact that some find this threatening reveals their commitment to systems based on scarcity rather than abundance. Delegate Horth stood to respond, but his words were interrupted by a commotion at the Assembly Hall's communications center. A priority transmission was coming through channels reserved for galactic emergencies. The message, when it played, sent shock waves through the assembled delegates. It was a recording from a HFY Industries facility, showing micro-drones being loaded with chemical agents while technicians discussed targeting Meridian atmosphere processors. The recording had been leaked by someone inside the operation, a whistleblower who had finally decided that poisoning planets crossed a line too far. This transmission was sent simultaneously to every major news network in the galaxy, the communications officer announced. It's already being broadcast across inhabited space. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness as she watched the recording. Satisfaction that the truth was finally exposed, sadness that it had taken near genocide to force it into the open. The Alliance calls for immediate dissolution of any consortium operations targeting member or potential member species, she announced. And we call for recognition that the galaxy works better when species help each other rather than compete for artificial scarcity. What followed was the most dramatic political realignment in galactic history. The Trade Security Council was disbanded within days as species after species demanded investigations into their operations. HFY Industries collapsed under the weight of legal action from 47 different civilizations. Most importantly, 16 new species applied for Alliance membership within the first week after the revelations became public. 6 months later, Sarah stood once again in the crystal gardens of Drakros Prime, but this time the gathering was much larger. Children from dozens of species played together while their parents worked on collaborative projects that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. The galaxy has learned to trust again, Elder Vorthak observed, watching a group of younglings that included not just humans and Draknari, but Meridians, Etherians, and others. It's still fragile, Sarah replied. Trust is harder to build than it is to destroy. Perhaps. But once planted, it grows stronger with each generation. These children will build a galaxy we can barely imagine. Dr. Rodriguez approached with her latest research tablet, her expression excited rather than concerned for the first time in months. Captain, I've been analyzing the cooperation patterns that have developed since the Alliance expanded. The level of innovation we're seeing exceeds anything in recorded galactic history. How so? Sarah asked, genuinely curious about the technical details. When species share knowledge freely, the rate of discovery increases exponentially rather than linearly. We're not just adding capabilities together. We're creating entirely new possibilities that no single species could have developed alone. Sarah looked around at the mixed group of beings working and playing together, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. It had started with a simple decision to answer a distress call that no one else would take. Everything else had followed from that single choice. The ironic thing, she said to Vorthak, is that the people trying to stop us probably thought they were protecting galactic stability. They couldn't see that cooperation creates more stability than competition ever could. Fear makes cowards of us all, Vorthak replied, using an old Draknari proverb that had gained popularity among Alliance species. But courage shared makes heroes of ordinary beings. As if summoned by their conversation, young Kellyan approached with a mixed group of children, all carrying small crystal formations they had grown together using techniques that combined human chemistry, Draknari crystallography, and meridian biotechnology. Captain Chun, Kellyan said formally, we wanted to show you what we've been working on. The crystal formations were beautiful, but more than that, they were functional. Each one could store and transmit information, generate small amounts of power, and serve as a communication relay. They were also completely biodegradable and self-repairing under the right conditions. It's for the new colonies, one of the human children explained excitedly. Places where different species want to live together, but need infrastructure that works for everyone. Sarah examined the crystals with growing amazement. The children had solved engineering problems that had stumped adult specialists for months, simply because they approached the challenges without preconceived limitations. This is incredible work, she told them. Have you shown this to the Alliance Engineering Council? We're presenting next week, Kellyan said proudly. Thessaria is helping us prepare the presentation. As the children ran off to continue their work, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The galaxy that was emerging from the Alliance's success was one where the next generation would grow up expecting cooperation rather than competition, where helping others was seen as natural rather than suspicious. The dragon summoned flame, she said quietly, remembering the first distress call that had started everything. And a forgotten child answered. Vorthak completed the phrase that had become something of an Alliance motto. But perhaps, Captain, we were all forgotten children, waiting for someone to remember that the galaxy works better when we work together. 3 weeks later, the wandering star received a transmission that made Sarah smile. It was from a species called the Nexari, located in a distant spiral arm that had never been in contact with the main galactic community. They had detected Alliance communication networks and were requesting contact with what they called the species who help each other. Set course for Nexari space, Sarah ordered, feeling the familiar excitement of a new adventure. Best possible speed. Aye, Captain, Lieutenant Webb replied with a grin that matched her own. Another species to help? Another species to meet, Sarah corrected. We'll figure out the helping part when we get there. As the wandering star jumped to hyperspace, carrying medical supplies and a crew ready to make new friends, Sarah thought about the galaxy they were helping to create. It wasn't perfect. No galaxy could be perfect when it contained so many different species with so many different needs. But it was better. It was a place where distress calls were answered, where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where children could play together while their parents built a future based on cooperation rather than competition. The dragon had summoned flame in its moment of greatest need, and a forgotten child had answered with compassion, creativity, and the simple belief that helping others was always worth the cost. But the real magic hadn't been in the rescue itself. It had been in the recognition that the galaxy was full of forgotten children, all waiting for someone to remember that they were worth helping. And in a galaxy where helping others had become the norm rather than the exception, where species work together because they chose to rather than because they were forced to, Everyone could finally come home. The flame burned brightly across the stars, tended by all who chose to add their light to its warmth. And in that shared flame, the galaxy had found something it had been missing for far too long. Hope for a future where no one had to face the darkness alone.